There are moments in history when a nation, pushed to the edge of despair, discovers the very soul it had forgotten. From the dry, wind-scorched plains of the Sahel, once called the poorest heart of the world, a voice rose up, not in pleading, but in a vow forged of steel. We will no longer live on our knees. That day, the soldiers of Burkina Faso marched to the front lines with more courage than weapons, for there were not enough guns to go around. That day, in the calloused hands of farmers, among rusted car frames and scraps of metal, they began rebuilding a nation, not with foreign aid, not with borrowed firepower, but with the will to be free. And at the center of that storm stood a young man, calm eyes and a voice that burned like flame. When asked, "Are you afraid?" he smiled and said, "If we fear, we hesitate. If we hesitate, we compromise. And when we compromise, we are already dead." And if it was not merely the declaration of a president, it was the manifesto of a generation rising to reclaim the right to live with dignity. When Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the podium for the first time, the flag of Burkina Faso waving behind him, no one knew that this moment would mark the beginning of a new chapter in Africa's history. He did not speak with words crafted by media advisors. He spoke like a soldier returning from the front line, carrying the scent of gunpowder, the dust of the earth, and an unshakable faith. We cannot continue to live in a world where others decide how free we are allowed to be. He declared, his voice low, firm, striking each word into the ground like a hammer. Before him stood not diplomats or politicians, but farmers, laborers, people who had known hunger, humiliation, and the shadow of foreign flags. They listened not because he was the president, but because they recognized that voice. It was their own, the voice that had been strangled for centuries. In his first days in power, Traoré looked across the defense system and faced a brutal truth. Burkina Faso was nearly empty. A nation surrounded by terror, yet armed with only a few hundred aging rifles, and barely enough ammunition for a single skirmish. Foreign powers circled them, those who claimed to help, while secretly holding every strategic decision in their hands. They wanted the war to drag on, so that Burkina Faso would never stand on its own. "We understood very quickly," Traoré later said. "This was not a war against terrorism, this was a war against dependence." And then came the decision that stunned the world. He expelled all French and American forces from the country. Many called it reckless. To him, it was the first breath of true sovereignty, because he knew no one can protect a nation that refuses to stand for itself. From empty armories and units armed with courage instead of weapons, he began rebuilding the military. He did not wait for aid. He did not wait for international approval. He called upon local makers, engineers, mechanics, craftsmen who had long abandoned their trades to return and build. They welded scrap metal into rifles. They turned farm trucks into armored vehicles. While other leaders sought safety in conference rooms, Traoré went straight to the battlefield. He ate with his soldiers, slept beside them, and said a sentence that silenced everyone around him. "We do not fight for glory. We fight for the right to live as human beings." From that moment, the spirit spread like fire across the Sahel plains. Villagers donated rice to the troops, blacksmiths forged knives, tailors stitched uniforms. Hundreds of young men and women volunteered to join the VDP, Volontaires pour la Défense de la Patrie, the People's Army. Burkina Faso became a laboratory of willpower, a nation with nothing but faith. Yet that faith was shaking empires once thought unbreakable. And as the world looked again at the map of Africa, it began to see something new. From the dry heart of the Sahel, a flame was rising, a flame called dignity. In the first months of this new war, there were no triumphant victories, only long nights, burned villages, and soldiers falling in silence. Yet in those moments of loss, the spirit of Burkina Faso began to forge a weapon no invader could ever buy faith in their own cause. The soldiers had no armor, no tanks, but each one carried a reason to fight. One fought for the village that had been burned to the ground, another for a mother who died fetching water, another still for the child who never got to learn how to read. And together, they repeated a single vow. "If we fall today, there will be no one left to rise tomorrow." The ECOWAS breakaway states of Burkina Faso and Mali arsenals, they lived in people's hearts. He said, "To win a war, you need two things, guns and will. But if I must choose one, I choose the will." So while powerful nations drafted strategies on maps, Burkina Faso wrote its own with sweat and blood. Small units began to form. Village militias, farm patrols, ordinary people turning into fighters. They learned to hide, to strike, to survive. They weren't just defending land, they were defending the dignity of a people. The tighter the siege, the more creative they became. When the world refused to sell them weapons, they built their own. When banks denied loans, they pooled taxes and fed their soldiers. When international organizations issued warnings, they answered with action. Burkina Faso began producing its own weapons, establishing ammunition workshops, and opening military academies taught by its own commanders. Traoré did not hide the truth. The day I took office, we had fewer than 100,000 bullets. Today, every bullet we fire is made of our people's blood, sweat, and belief. The entire nation became a battlefield in motion. In rural towns, villagers dug shelters. Children studied under makeshift roofs. Women cooked for soldiers. In cities, students trained for combat. Engineers converted factories into arms workshops. Every wheel turned, every rifle forged, every uniform sewn carried one message. We feed ourselves. We defend ourselves. Then something extraordinary began to happen. The spirit spread beyond their borders. Young men from Mali, Niger, even Senegal and Chad wrote letters asking to come to Burkina Faso to learn how to fight for dignity. The story of a small army that refused to kneel became a flame lighting up an entire continent. But Traoré knew war was not just bullets and battles, it was a war of minds, between rulers and the awakened. The enemy didn't only want their land or gold. They wanted to erase the belief that Africa could decide its own destiny. In a closed meeting with his commanders, he said, "We're not just fighting enemies at our borders. We're fighting the enemies inside our minds: fear, compromise, inferiority. If we surrender to fear, we've lost before firing the first shot." From then on, every march was more than a mission. It was a lesson in courage, a test of dignity in the face of despair. The soldiers of Burkina Faso were no longer mere fighters. They became guardians of a free spirit. Amid the storm of bullets and fire, a single phrase was carved into the walls of their barracks: "We do not fight to survive, we fight to deserve life." And so, the world began to call it by a new name: the War of Will and Blood, a war that only those who refuse to bow their heads can ever understand the true meaning of freedom. As the smoke of battle slowly lifted from the borderlands, people began to see something extraordinary. From within the war, Burkina Faso was being reborn, not through treaties or foreign loans, but through the rough, calloused hands of its own people. 2 years after the decision to stand alone, the small nation began to wear a new face, a country of people no longer afraid. Across the villages of the Sahel, small workshops sprouted like grass after rain. The sound of hammers, anvils, and grinding wheels echoed through the air, mingling with the laughter of children. In places once reduced to ashes, people now built steel forges, armored vehicle assembly yards, and munitions plants. Traoré, standing among them, did not hide his pride. "Tomorrow, our soldiers will hold weapons forged right here in Burkina Faso." And the miracle was this: in poverty, they found limitless creativity. A group of young engineers from the University of Ouagadougou, once dismissed as a lost generation, had become architects of a new national defense industry. They turned scrap into machinery, recycled metal from abandoned cars into military tools. No one taught them, no manuals existed. They learned by trying, failing, and refusing to give up. At the heart of the capital, a solar battery plant built and operated by students was inaugurated. Its energy flowed to the countryside, powering water pumps, lights, and crop dryers. "This is not just a factory," Traoré said as he cut the ribbon. "It is a declaration that we can create our own future." Meanwhile, the government launched the Food Sovereignty Campaign. Once barren fields were reclaimed and replanted. Farmers were given seeds, tools, and organic fertilizer developed by domestic research institutes. "No nation is truly independent if it must import its own meal," Traoré reminded his people. Every farmer became a soldier of the new economy. Villages built communal granaries and self-managed markets. In many places, people traded goods instead of currency. A trust economy was replacing the old systems of dependency. No longer waiting for approval from distant financial institutions, the people of Burkina Faso were learning to value their own labor. From a country once reliant on aid, Burkina Faso was transforming into a symbol of self-reliance. Neighboring nations began to take notice and to follow. In Niger and Mali, groups of young engineers reached out. We want to build African weapons for African hands. A wave of independence was spreading not through slogans, but through results. The Western world began to pay attention. Envoys arrived, seeking to reopen dialogue. But this time, Traoré was no longer the young captain standing barehanded in the desert. Behind him now stood an army of engineers, farmers, workers, and soldiers. When asked if he needed technical assistance, he simply smiled. We do not need to be taught how to stand only to be free from those who would force us to kneel. Burkina Faso was no longer fighting only for its own survival, but for the future of an entire continent. In every brick laid, every road paved, every small factory built, there shone a single conviction. Freedom is not a gift. It is the reward of courage and perseverance. And as night fell once more over the Sahel, the rising columns of smoke were no longer from war, but from the chimneys of new industries. A nation was taking shape, not just on the map, but in the hearts of millions. When the first factories began to hum with life, Traoré understood that the real battle was far from over. The enemy outside could be defeated with guns, but the enemy within greed, fear, and compromise could only be defeated with ethics and faith. In a meeting with his ministers, he said, "We can build 1,000 bridges, 100 factories, but if the hearts of our people remain corrupt, this nation will fall again." Revolution does not begin with the rifle, it begins in the soul. And so, a quiet revolution began. No drums, no parades, only slow, steady transformations within the hearts of ordinary people. In schools, children now studied civic and revolutionary ethics, not as dry theory, but through living stories. The soldier who gave his life for a comrade, the farmer who shared half his harvest with someone poorer. In government offices, officials long accustomed to taking percentages were now required to declare their assets and work transparently before the public. Traoré issued a clear directive. No one deserves privilege while the nation still suffers. He banned the import of foreign liquor for government use, reduced state vehicles, and auctioned off luxury residences to fund schools and clinics. When asked why, he answered simply, "You cannot drink champagne while your women drown carrying water." That image swept across the nation. People no longer saw their leader behind tinted windows. They saw him in a simple uniform, sitting among workers, eating the same food, speaking the same language. Gradually, trust returned. In the markets, merchants began paying taxes voluntarily. In rural villages, citizens formed integrity councils, community assemblies to oversee public spending and local projects. "Before," said one farmer, "we thought the government was something far away. Now, the government is us." Traoré's dream was not only of an independent economy, but of independent morality, a society where people lived by principle and accountability to one another. In a national address, he declared, "No one can force us to be corrupt, not if we refuse to touch the dirty coin." True independence begins the moment we stop selling our souls for comfort. From that idea grew a movement, Live for the Homeland. Thousands of young volunteers left the cities for rural villages to teach, build roads, open clinics, and rebuild bridges. Elders began retelling the stories of Thomas Sankara and saw in Traoré the rebirth of that same spirit, young, honest, fearless, and accountable. Every brick in a new classroom, every page in a newly printed textbook was paid for not by donors, but by the people themselves. There were no sponsors, no aid funds, only belief. Burkina Faso was proving that morality is not an abstract idea, it is the foundation of a nation. And so, what began as a war against terrorism had become a war against corruption of the soul, a silent battle, fiercer than any fought with weapons. Traoré often told his advisors, "A nation is not reborn through blood, but through honesty. That is something no weapon can create." His word. So when the evening sun touched the Ouagadougou square and the red and green flag whipped proudly in the wind, the people did not see just the symbol of victory. They saw the living shape of a nation learning once again how to live with truth, with dignity, and with one another. As Burkina Faso began to stand firm on its own 2 feet, the hidden winds of the world began to stir. There were no longer bombs or bullets, but attacks from the shadows. Media campaigns, veiled threats, and cold voices over distant phone lines. Traoré knew it before anyone else. He once told his inner circle, "No empire lets its prey escape without a chase." We've touched their deepest wound, dependence. Only months after announcing domestic arms production, the blow came. International banks froze segments of Burkina Faso's trade accounts. Exports of cotton and gold were abruptly under review. Western headlines began to appear, branding him a young dictator, a threat to global order. But to everyone's surprise, he stayed silent. No retaliation, no complaint. In a press conference, he said only this: "People fear only those who walk the right path. And if the world trembles because of us, perhaps we are doing something right." That silence became the loudest declaration. Inside the country, public faith did not fade, it grew stronger. People understood they were facing an invisible but very real enemy: global manipulation. Foreign intelligence networks crept in. Some officials were tempted, a few were bought. One night, a coup attempt was uncovered. But this time, before the army even mobilized, the people rose first. In Ouagadougou, thousands filled the streets, holding banners that read, "We have chosen dignity, and we will not let anyone steal it back." When a journalist asked Traoré if he feared assassination, he smiled, "They can kill a body, not an idea. If I fall, thousands will rise in my place." During the most dangerous nights, he would visit frontline units, not to command, but to listen. He traveled with only a few companions, without motorcades or guards. One veteran soldier recalled, "He came in the middle of the night, sat with us by the fire, ate the same cold rice, said almost nothing. But when we looked into his eyes, we knew we could never afford to fall." What the world failed to understand was that in Burkina Faso, the war had gone beyond politics. It had become a faith, a belief in justice, in the power of self-redemption. Villages held nights of prayer for dignity. People lit candles, sang old Sankara-era songs, and sent blessings to soldiers guarding the front. No decree, no command, just the instinct of a people who finally knew their direction. But Traoré also knew that such strength had to be guarded by clarity and discipline. He tightened internal security and launched a special initiative: Education Against Manipulation. Universities opened courses on cognitive warfare, teaching students to analyze news, question narratives, and detect propaganda. "Today," he said, "the most dangerous bullet isn't made of steel, it's made of lies." The world continued to watch Burkina Faso with suspicion. Yet beneath that silence, something undeniable was taking root. Trust, unbreakable trust between a leader and his people. Because no enemy can defeat a nation that no longer doubts itself. And when the sun set over the Sahel, people often saw Traoré standing by the flagpole at the base, facing west toward the storms of politics still raging beyond the horizon. He said nothing, only placed his hand over his heart, a silent vow. Even in darkness, the light must be kept alive. As the storms finally receded, over the land once burned by war, a new dawn began to break, not with the blinding glare of fireworks, but with the gentle light of belief. Burkina Faso, once dismissed as the poorest nation in the world, had become a beacon for an entire continent. From Bamako to Niamey, from N'Djamena to Dakar, young people began to speak the name Burkina Faso, not with pity, but with respect. In this small nation, they saw not a new economic model, not a political formula, but a new way of being. The courage to refuse to kneel. On local television screens, Traoré's image was no longer cropped or distorted. He appeared in his dark military uniform, sitting among workers, speaking of Africa's right to self-determination. "If we do not produce, we will consume the pain of others," he said. "If we do not learn to defend ourselves, we will end up hiring others to kill for us." His words swept across the continent, becoming the rallying cry of a generation. In Ghana, students painted murals of Traoré beside Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah, leaders who once dreamed of a truly sovereign Africa. In Senegal, young journalists published essays titled, "Burkina Faso is no longer a nation, it is the mirror of our own soul." Neighboring countries began sending technical delegations to Ouagadougou, not to seek aid, but to learn how to rebuild trust. Mali and Niger signed treaties for water sharing, energy cooperation, and joint defense. Laying the foundation for the Sahel alliance, the vision Traoré had spoken of since his first days in power. "None of us can be free," he declared at the signing ceremony, "while our neighbors remain in chains." New roads began to link the three capitals. Shared solar plants rose from the desert, where minefields once scarred the borderlands. Golden millet fields now waved in the wind. and children ran laughing beneath the vast Sahel sky. No one could have imagined that in just a few years, this land of sand and sorrow would become a symbol of life. But the greatest miracle was not found in the factories or the treaties. It was found in the hearts of the people. At a national memorial, Traoré stood before thousands and said, "We have learned the greatest lesson of all. Dignity is not something to be given. It is forged by hands that choose to do what is right." The crowd fell silent. Then, as if moved by one breath, thousands raised their hands together, a collective vow. The image spread across Africa, becoming the emblem of the Sahel awakening, a spiritual movement calling for self-reliance, justice, and unity. From that moment, young Africans began to rewrite their own story. They founded startups in agriculture, technology, and renewable energy. They no longer dreamed of fleeing to Europe. They dreamed of building a future on the soil of their ancestors. "I don't need a visa," wrote a Nigerian student on a university wall. "I need faith." End of sentence. At international conferences, Burkina Faso's representatives now spoke with calm defiance. "We have not come to ask for help," they said. "We have come to speak as equals." That quiet confidence silenced many global leaders. Perhaps they realized that the smallest of nations had grown a giant soul. One evening, as the Sahel sun sank below the horizon, Traoré stood atop a hill overlooking Trial City, a city built of packed earth and unshakable belief. He said nothing. He didn't have to. For sometimes, the silence of a free people is louder than any speech. Lights flickered on across the new city, their glow rising into the violet sky. No one spoke, but everyone knew. Burkina Faso had come back to life, and with it, Africa had begun to awaken. Evening falls over the Sahel. The wind moves softly through the red dust streets of Trial City, a city not built with money, but with will and dreams. The sun glows against the earthen walls, turning them the color of molten gold. Windows shimmer with lamplight. Children laugh in the distance. The sound of hammers and forges echoes from workshops, blending with the rhythm of the wind and the songs of women pounding grain beside their homes. Trial City is more than a city. It is a living declaration of Burkina Faso's soul. Every brick here was shaped by human hands. Every road was paved with
of
belief.
its most notable
Every
West
school
African
was
friends,
raised with love.
Mali and
People
Burkina
call it
Faso.
affectionately the City of the Oath. At its heart stands a great stone monument, engraved in 3 languages, a promise every citizen knows by heart. Dignity is not something to be given. It is forged by hands that choose to do what is right. From this place, Burkina Faso sent forth the Oath of Trial City, a vow that they would never again return to the days of submission. On the morning, the central square was inaugurated. Tens of thousands gathered. There were no grand parades, no distant dignitaries watching from a stage. Only Traoré, standing among his people in a simple uniform, holding the national flag. He said nothing, bowed his head, and drove the flagpole into the earth at the center of the plaza. At that moment, the wind rose. The red, green, and yellow banner unfurled, and the crowd erupted not on command but from pure emotion. Burkina, rise again. Burkina, freedom. Egrisil, a tearful old woman beside a foreign journalist, whispered, "They once called us the poorest people in the world, but now we are the richest, for we have found our pride again." In the days that followed, Trial City became a place of pilgrimage. Students from across the nation came not to sightsee, but to learn how a small people achieved something immense. Old craftsmen taught young men how to forge steel. Young engineers taught children to build solar panels. Citizens established the Museum of Dignity, displaying relics from the days of struggle, a rusted rifle, a pair of worn leather sandals, a hand-drawn map on recycled paper. Each artifact told a story of belief. In those halls, international journalists came and fell silent. A French reporter said quietly, "I've traveled the world, but I've never seen a nation resurrected by faith alone. They do not need great men. They have become great themselves." 8. Burkina Faso no longer spoke of the past with bitterness, but with quiet pride. Children born after the war grew up not knowing hunger, but they were taught, freedom is not our parents' gift, it is our duty to protect. During a meeting with university students, Traoré said the words that the whole nation would later carve into memory. "We built Trial City from earth, but what keeps it standing is spirit. One day I may disappear, but if you hold on to this spirit, this country will never fall." The words were engraved on a bronze plaque at the gates of the city's first university. Every morning, students pass by, placing a hand upon it, a quiet ritual of remembrance. When night descends, Trial City glows not just with electric light, but with the radiance of awakened hearts. On the Western Hill, an eternal flame burns, the symbol of Burkina Faso's indestructible spirit. The Sahel winds bend the flame, but it never goes out. And from this city, that vow, the oath of Trial City, began to travel beyond borders and languages, carried by those who believe. It whispered across Africa like a new dawn. The time has come for Africans to write their own destiny. The sun sets over the Sahel. The horizon burns red, a vast flame fading slowly behind the distant hills, casting its glow upon the earthen rooftops of Trial City, a city born from courage and belief. The sky turns the color of bronze, and the last rays of light fall gently across the land, like the day's quiet farewell. In the heart of the square, the flag of Burkina Faso flutters in the evening wind. At its base, a stone slab bears the words carved deep. Dignity is not something to be given. It is forged by hands that choose to do what is right. Nearby, a group of workers rests after a long day. They share a simple meal, millet, beans, and water, as children's laughter echoes from the newly built streets. There are no parades, no fireworks, yet everyone knows they are living in victory, the quiet triumph of will over fate. At the edge of the square, a young soldier stands watch. He gazes toward the horizon, where the sun sinks into the earth, and he smiles. On his shoulder rests a rifle made in Burkina Faso. In his heart, the certainty that the road ahead, though long, is the right one. Down the street, Traore walks slowly along the red stone path without an entourage, just two guards following at a distance. He stops before the monument at the center of the plaza and stands in silence. The wind stirs, carrying the scent of dust and grass across the square. Then he speaks softly, his voice steady and low, as if to himself, "We survived the storm not by miracle, but by faith. And if one day I am no longer here, let this flame guide those who come after." That moment was captured on film, and it became the closing line of the documentary Trial City. No music, only the sound of the Sahel wind and the heartbeat of a nation reborn. Night falls. Trial City lights up not with noise or splendor, but with the quiet radiance of hope. Each lamp is a dream still burning. Each home, a story still unfolding. From afar, the city gleams against the dark horizon, a single, brilliant scar of freedom carved into the desert. The story of Burkina Faso is no longer just the story of one nation. It is a reminder to all humanity: dignity cannot be bought, and freedom cannot be borrowed. Every people, every person, must one day face the question, do we have the courage to do what is right, no matter the cost? And if you have listened this far, remember this: true strength does not lie in weapons or power, but in the heart that dares to believe and to rise. Burkina Faso has chosen that path. And the world is watching. Leave a comment if you believe a nation can rebuild itself from nothing. Subscribe to follow the stories of dignity, freedom, and human light. Because sometimes it takes only one small flame to ignite the entire desert.